Hello, everyone, and welcome to Persuasive Communications. My name is Professor Mirna Pantic, and I'm recording this lecture in the middle of the night. So bear with me. I'm going to share my screen and start the slideshow. So today we're going to talk about fundamentals of the message, and I want to start this lecture by asking you to consider several questions. How should I craft a message? Should I use emotional appeals or appear dry? Is it better to state the argument bluntly or frame it more tentatively? Should you frighten your audience a little with your message? How can you design a message that convinces people to behave the way you want them to? Let's take a look at the message structure. To us as communicators, the most important thing is how to organize our message, what information to include in that message, how to start the message so in order to engage people. We are also concerned what is the most persuasive way to conclude the message and whether we should present both sides of the issue or just our own. Let's take a look at the first thing, conclusion drawing. What should we do? Should I draw conclusions? There are arguments on both sides to state the conclusion explicitly and not to do so. I will remind you of one of my previous lectures when I discussed this. We talked about that in some ways, especially when it comes to people who are not really acquainted with the topic you're discussing, it is important to state conclusions, but also when you're addressing highly intelligent people, sometimes it's not good to state conclusions because they might be offended. Like, why are you telling me at the end? Like, why are you explaining these things to me at the end? I know that I understand that from your speech. Also, the problem with highly intelligent audience is that if you draw conclusions, if you avoid drawing conclusions, then um, they might think that you're hiding something from them. So there are definitely arguments on both sides, but at the end of the day, the most of the research on persuasion gives credit to those who explicitly articulate a conclusion. They are more persuasive than those who omit a conclusion. Another thing to look into is message structure or message sidedness. Should I present both sides of an argument? It really depends. If you two-sided messages are really important, they influence attitudes more than one-sided messages, but when one important condition is met, the message refutes opposition arguments. So you need to include in your message your position, then you're going to discuss the opposing argument, and then you're going to refute it. So that's basically the usual structure. Also, present a one-sided argument when the audience strongly agrees with your point and with your points. So one such example is definitely um, reflected in political campaigns when politicians go to speak at conventions and they know that those people who attend the convention are most likely, I mean, it is going to be those people who support them already. So, of course, they need to present only a one-sided argument. They don't need to discuss both sides because those people attending their convention already agree with them. Let's take a look at an example that I put together. And that example is not related to politics, but remote work that we all think about these days. So this message is created to convince people to accept the idea of remote work. But the message also acknowledges the drawbacks of remote work. Let's take a look at how that message is put together. Working remotely has become increasingly popular and it offers several clear advantages. Employees often report higher job satisfaction, reduced commuting time, and greater flexibility in managing their work-life balance. Organizations can also benefit from lower overhead costs and access to a broader talent pool. At the same time, remote work is not without challenges. Some employees struggle with isolation, collaboration can be more difficult, and managers may find it harder to monitor performance and maintain team cohesion. Despite these concerns, the benefits of remote work outweigh the drawbacks when organizations implement clear communication practices, provide collaboration tools, and set performance expectations. For these reasons, adopting a flexible remote work policy is a strong and forward-looking choice. So as you can see, there is a pro argument, there is a discussion on the opposing argument, and then there's refutation of that argument. One important thing to consider is misinformation and how to deal with that. Let me just give you a brief definition of misinformation. It is basically any false information that is shared unintentionally. And I'm borrowing this further explanation from the book, my book about digital news literacy. Although it does not have malicious intent, misinformation still has the potential to cause harm because it can result in confusion and reinforcement of false beliefs. Why is this important? It is really important when we present two-sided arguments on issues affected by misinformation that we actively rebut false and misleading claims. So if we have a health message where we want to convince people to get a COVID shot, for example, we also need to refute the belief that vaccine cause autism. That misinformation has been widely circulated despite being thoroughly disproven by scientific research. So, failing to address and correct this misinformation risks reinforcing false beliefs rather than promoting informed understanding. For that reason, you need to ensure to provide evidence that refutes such misinformation. Now, at this point, I want you to do an exercise and you will present this exercise in class. So, what I want you to do is to create a persuasive message on a contemporary issue of your choice. Your message must clearly state a position on the issue, include credible evidence such as research findings, statistics, present two-sided arguments by acknowledging opposing viewpoints, refute misinformation by identifying at least one false or misleading claim and explaining why it is incorrect using evidence. Your goal is to demonstrate how effective persuasive communication balances fairness, accuracy, and clarity while guiding the audience toward an informed conclusion. Write about 300 words and post it under crafting a message. Present the message in class. So please prepare to present this message in class when we meet. Also, bear with me because even though I provided instructions for you, I have a couple of very important points to share. And so watch this lecture until the end before you start working on your exercise. It is important. Let's take a look at the message content. What do we need to include in our message? Provide factual assertion or quantitative information that will bolster your argument. Why? Evidence can greatly contribute to attitude change. It is especially persuasive when attributed to a highly credible source. If we are talking about vaccines, for instance, it is always important to provide an argument like of the reduction of COVID cases because more and more people were getting vaccinated in 2021. Some examples also when I talk about highly credible sources. So let's say if we discuss the cause of that in the US and if we want to raise awareness of um, preventative health, exercising, and so on, then the information we might include is this one. The leading cause of that in the US is heart disease, followed by cancer. According to CDC in 2023, 919,032 people died from cardiovascular disease. 919,032 people died from cardiovascular disease. I'm telling you today, I'm really tonight I'm tired. So what's the point? So the point is that we are using this information to prove our point that people should engage in preventive health and exercising, but also we're attributing this information to a very credible source. So don't just go online and pick information from any source that you find, especially not from Wikipedia, but try to look into credible sources and what they say. Another example of how evidence can help, how evidence can contribute to our arguments, to our message is this one. Median earnings for college graduates are more than 21,000 higher than median salary and wages for high school graduates in a given year, and nearly twice as much over the course of a lifetime. So you can see this should be like motivational for you to um, finish your um, to complete your grad school program. So if we look at the message content, another thing that could be very engaging for your audience is a narrative. Sometimes we use narrative to change people's attitudes. How is that effective? And what a narrative represents? Narrative is basically a coherent story with an identifiable beginning, middle, and end. So you can tell a story of a person who made like a big change in their life if you want to make a clear point that people should consider doing the same. A well designed narrative can transport people to different places, the world of the author's imagination. So it gets us immersed in a story. So the only issue here is to what extent can actually people be paying attention and feel transported to different places. Another important element to consider when it comes to messages, persuasive messages, is framing. What does it mean? You probably by this time, you probably heard of framing theory. And I actually recently used that theory to explain how political candidates were framed, whether they were framed in a positive or a negative way during presidential elections in news stories. So, what is a frame? A frame is a way an idea is communicated. Framing focuses on how the presentation and emphasis of certain elements of a message can shape public perceptions of issues and impact individual decision making. It is also when, let's say, as you know, I'm an avid runner, and when I talk about running, there are people who oppose running. They would frame it as, oh, it's bad for your knees, don't do this. So it's kind of framed in a negative way. But then on the other hand, because I enjoy running, I would frame it as this is the best sport ever. It is very diverse. It helped me make so many friends in New York City. It helped me stay healthy and fit, and so on. So you see, like, we emphasize certain important components of the message, like I emphasized my social connections and staying healthy um, in relation to running. So we emphasize this, and that's how we frame message. And then the other person who hates running, they really don't like it. They would always point at certain drawbacks, potential drawbacks. Framing basically means that you select some aspects of the reality and make them more salient in a way to promote a certain position. So he's promoting his position against running, and I'm promoting mine pro running. The way a message is framed can influence attitudes. A communicator should not frame a message involving topics based on his own moral values, but rather should call in frames on the target audience. Let's consider this message. So, the frame of this message is basically being a donor is a positive thing. So, it is framed in a positive way. And let's see how it looks like. Why should people consider being organ donors? I am an organ donor. Organ donation saves lives and gives hope to thousands of people waiting for transplants. One donor can help multiple patients, restoring health and allowing families to have more time together. By choosing to become an organ donor, you make a powerful, compassionate decision that can turn loss into life and create a lasting legacy of generosity. So, this is an example of a message that is framed in a way to convince people consider being organ donors. Other important elements of a message. So we talked about the message, the structure of messages and how they are being framed, what kind of content they incorporate. But now let's take a look at the language. And the first component of it is speed of speech. Speech rate, how does that affect attitudes? Speech rate does not inevitably change attitudes, but whether it will have positive or negative effect on persuasion depends on the context. Now let's take a look at some examples. Speech rate may enhance persuasion when the goal of the persuader is to capture attention. It can be effective when the persuader wants to be perceived as competent. Speaking quickly, for example, so if you speak at a faster pace, your goal is to be perceived as competent. Speaking quickly tells the audience that the communicator is credible and knowledgeable. Moderately fast and fast speakers are actually seen as more confident, more intelligent, and effective than slower speakers. Speech rate can be effective when the audience is low in involvement. In that case, speech rate can serve as a peripheral cue. So speak faster so they can feel like they're really exposed to the speech of a credible person. But there are moments when we need to consider to speak at a slower rate. One such example is when there is a crisis event, citizens may respond more positively to a slower speaking communicator because when they hear someone who speaks at the measured pace, slow, then it actually conveys calm and reassurance. So they're reassuring people that everything is going to be fine. They're making sure they're remaining calm during a national crisis, and that is actually more effective than speaking quickly. Another thing to consider is powerful versus powerless speech. So powerless speech is, I guess, when I tell you, I'm a little tired, but is it actually powerless? I mentioned that more as a joke, even though I am tired. I am a little tired. It's the middle of the night. So that's kind of maybe not the best way if I were to talk for the first time in front of someone, but I've known you already for a certain period of time. I've delivered so many lectures, so I can also be a little honest with you, and that could be effective. But let me give you some examples of powerful speech and how you should avoid it, especially when you're addressing someone for the first time. Powerless speech basically suggests to a message receiver that the communicator is less powerful than he or she really is. An example is, I know this sounds like a stupid question, but, or I'm not an expert, of course, or I'll go back. Or like one of the things that I notice with my students, sometimes it happens, like, because we cover influential people from all over the world, and sometimes we struggle to figure out how to pronounce someone's name. But, today with all the tools that we have, you can just simply go to any of them and make sure to check how to pronounce someone's name before you deliver your presentation. It's really much better to even pronounce it, even to make a little mistake, than to just show up in front of like a screen and start saying how you're not sure how to pronounce this person's name. Well, it's your presentation, so it is important to learn these things before you deliver that presentation in front of class. I also want to point at something when it comes to powerless speech. So I mentioned, I said I was tired and I'm filming this lecture in the middle of the night, which is actually true. But it can also be a little relatable because maybe you're watching this lecture in the middle of the night. So like you're not the only one um, currently maybe struggling to absorb this knowledge. Um, so it doesn't need to be like such a strong example of powerless speech, but it's definitely when you are in an audience and you say something like, I know this sounds like a stupid question. Why? There is no stupid question. And also, um, don't degrade yourself. So just ask a question and, because you want an answer to that question. And powerless speech, where aside from the powerless speech, there is another form, which is powerful speech. And how do we manage to be powerful speakers? It's basically the absence of the feature stated above. It is more persuasive. What do? We focus, we don't emphasize any potential flaws or anything that would point at lack of credibility. But sometimes powerless speech can be more effective. One such example is using powerless speech when you wish to generate goodwill rather than expertise or emphasize sincerity. So in this case, I use powerless speech just to if if you feel like that I'm not so clear or I switch from one point to another, it is because I'm recording this in the middle of the night. But anyway, I'll be able to clarify it all when we meet in person. Whatever you feel is, the lecture should not be complex. I think it is pretty straightforward. But anyway, I will certainly discuss it in more detail in class. So, language intensity. What is also important to know when it comes to delivering the message? Charismatic speakers use language colorfully, they use a lot of metaphors, and that attracts an audience that keeps them engaged. Then, intense language, especially these metaphors, can influence attitudes, increase motivation, and invoke positive mental images. When addressing individuals who share the communicator's attitudes, intense language can arouse passion and mobilize individuals to join a partisan cause. So, this is also another important element that contributes to language intensity and its use in such situations. So, when it comes to sensitive issues, on the other hand, and we mentioned this example of a national crisis, intense language can turn people off and cause people to reject a message they might otherwise faith. One final thing that I want to mention is the sleeper effect. So we talked about misinformation, and this is in a way similar to the sleeper effect in some ways. One such example is Girl Scout cookies have been mixed with hashish. These are false assertions. So they're false assertions that have been around for years. They were created by people who initially inspired little trust or respect. Over time, people forgot the source of the message but continued to remember and believe the message itself. This is what we call the sleeper effect. Be very careful with them and refrain from using them for your message, because there are people who are aware these messages are not they're not supported in reality. The sleeper effect is the notion that the effects of a persuasive communication increase with the passage of time. So as the time passes, people are more likely to believe in that message you deliver to them. A message initially discounted by message receivers comes to be accepted over time. So there is this notion, but um, it's not a it hasn't been the norm in persuasion, even though some people argue that sleeper effect is relevant, because just like any rumor, after a certain period of time, a persuasive message also um, stays inside the receiver's head. But again, sleeper's effect are not the norm in persuasion. It's something that is being discussed. The sleeper effect is to a certain extent relevant, but still not the norm. So we don't really know if this holds true for the majority, that these messages remain, that they still remember these messages and that their persuasiveness increase with the passage of time. Let's take a look at the most important points of this lecture. What do we do when we are structuring a message? Is it important to draw a conclusion? The majority of researchers claim that you should explicitly state your conclusions for maximum persuasiveness. When it comes to message sidedness, use two-sided messages that acknowledge and refute opposing arguments. Use one-sided only if the audience already strongly agrees with you. So if you're politicians at the convention, you know what to do. Use one-sided arguments because whoever showed up there, they're most likely to highly agree with you on all the issues you're gonna discuss. When it comes to misinformation, remember to refute false claim when presenting two-sided arguments. Now, looking into evidence versus narrative, it is always important to use credible evidence, such as facts and statistics, for attitude change, especially from a highly credible source. Evidence is always more important than, and not more important, like it is more important to focus on the evidence than narrative structures, but also narratives can have an impact on attitudes by transporting the audience to that desired environment. Framing. Framing entails emphasizing certain aspects of reality to promote a specific position. Looking into different types of speeches, powerful speech is generally more persuasive and it should be more embraced than powerless speech. Um, but powerless speech is effective in some situation when we want to elicit goodwill or we want to empathize with the audience, when we want to be sincere, and so on. When it comes to powerful, but you should avoid phrases that reflect the speech, such powerless speech, such as "I'm not an expert" on I don't really know this, but and so on. Fast speech can suggest competence, but a slower pace may be preferred during national crisis to convey calm. These are my references for the lecture. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. Just send me an email and I will see you soon in person. Thank you very much for listening and have a great day. Bye bye.